The air hung thick and humid, tasting of salt, fear, and burnt cordite. This was not the frozen grey canvas of the European plains, yet the machine shaking the ground was the very symbol of Allied victory in the West, the M10 tank destroyer. A long, low silhouette, an open turret exposing its crew to the harsh tropical sun, and the massive, unmistakable profile of the 3-inch M7 gun. But this was the Pacific, and the enemy was not the sleek, heavy Panthers of the Wehrmacht. It was the unseen, the dug-in, the fanatically determined. The American GIs called these places hell holes. They had come prepared for tanks, but found fortresses. The M10, often referred to by its crews as the Wolverine, was born of a singular European doctrine, the rapid, mobile counterattack against the German blitzkrieg. Its design was a study in strategic compromise, light armor for speed, a powerful gun for tank killing. It was the epitome of the tank destroyer force, mandated to never be found alongside frontline infantry, but to lie in wait, ambush its prey, and disappear. In Europe, it was an effective, though often underestimated, predator against the early Panzerfahrfuss. But here on the beaches of Luzon, the M10 faced a terrifying contradiction. The Imperial Japanese Army, IJA, possessed few tanks capable of challenging the M4 Sherman, let alone a dedicated tank destroyer. Their largest threat was the Type 95 Hago, a light, nimble, yet thinly armored relic of the 1930s. The M10, with its standard armor-piercing capped APC rounds, was overkill, a sledgehammer for a mosquito. The real threat was the pillbox, the reinforced concrete bunker, the labyrinth of tunnels that bled American infantry dry. The M10's kinetic energy rounds were ill-suited for the prolonged, destructive demolition work required. They penetrated, but often failed to maximize explosive effect. The early days of the Pacific Campaign saw M10s struggling. Standard high-explosive, HE rounds, were inadequate for the heavily reinforced Japanese emplacements. The tank destroyers, deployed against doctrine to provide direct fire support, were often static targets, their open turrets vulnerable to flanking Japanese infantry, wielding magnet mines and explosives. The American strategy was fundamentally flawed for the environment. Lieutenant Frank Ellis, M10 platoon leader, 776th Tank Destroyer Battalion, based on historical accounts. We felt naked out there. We could spot a Hago at 1,000 yards and kill it easy, but a pillbox? We'd slam 3 rounds into the embrasure, and the damn thing would just cough dust and keep firing. The Japs knew exactly how to reinforce the steel and coral. Our boys were dying 50 feet away while we tried to chip away at the concrete. The shift began in the smoky, high-stakes testing grounds back in the United States. Engineers, perpetually seeking the edge against heavier German armor like the Tiger and King Tiger, had developed a revolutionary new round, high-velocity armor-piercing, HVAP, or T4 shot. This was not just a bigger shell, it was a completely new science of kinetic energy. The HVAP round featured a tungsten carbide core, a super-dense metal, density of $15. $6x to $3 for sintered tungsten carbide compared to steel's Hysim 72s, $8x to $3, sheathed in a lighter aluminum casing. When fired from the M7 gun, the lighter-than-standard projectile, traveling at an astonishing 3,300 feet per second, a roughly 35% increase in muzzle velocity over the standard APC round, delivered a devastating, narrow strike. Its performance against thick, rolled homogeneous armor, RHA, was unparalleled. The HVAP was a desperate measure intended for the looming heavy metal clashes of the European Reich. In fact, in the late 1944 and early 1945 European theater, HVAP shipments were prioritized to the M36 Jackson 90mm gun and even the standard M4 Shermans mounting the 76mm gun. What the strategists in the Pentagon did not initially grasp was that this hyper-dense, high-speed projectile, designed to crack heavy German steel, was perhaps even more effective against Japanese concrete and coral. The sheer kinetic energy, the surgical speed of the tungsten core, meant that the shell passed through the hardened outer layers and internal steel rebar of a pillbox before the entire structure could absorb the force. It didn't just penetrate, it introduced a massive localized shockwave, spalling the interior and collapsing the structure from within. The first shipments of these rare, strictly allocated shells, initially diverted to the Pacific as a test against Type 95 tanks, were about to change the face of the Pacific War, transforming the M10 from a mobile anti-tank platform into the ultimate, precise siege weapon. The Japanese, prepared for the steady, predictable penetration of conventional shells, were about to face a new reality, a steel wind that moved faster than sound and pulverized everything in its path. The M10s of the 776th TD Battalion, skeptical of their new, unfamiliar and rare ammunition, were about to be thrust into a baptism by fire on the brutal battlefields of Okinawa and Iwo Jima. The tungsten core, a miracle of Allied metallurgy, was about to deliver a verdict the Japanese Empire never expected. Don't miss the next chapter of the M10's Second War, when steel wind met the jungle, where we witness the first terrifying engagement of the HVAP round against the Japanese defenses and the engineers' reaction to its unexpected effectiveness. If you enjoy this deep dive into WW2 strategy and technology, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more episodes. The atmosphere in the Pacific was fundamentally different from Europe. It was a war of meticulous, horrifying infantry attrition, where every inch was a concrete, coral or volcanic fortress. The Japanese defense doctrine, epitomized by the new command under General Tadamichi Kuribayashi at Iwo Jima, was simple: make every yard cost 1,000 lives. They abandoned the old linear defensive lines and instead created deep, interdependent networks of bunkers, caves and tunnels, a defense in depth where a single position could survive a week of bombardment. The M10 crews, meanwhile, were confused by their new ammunition. It looked sleek but felt lighter. The handling instructions were almost academic, focusing on high-angle penetration against heavy armor, not demolition. PFC Ben Carter, loader, M10 tank destroyer, based on historical accounts. The sergeant told us these were special loads for the big steel monsters. We looked at the pathetic Type 95s the Japs had, and we looked at the thick concrete walls in front of us and thought, what good is a thinner, faster shell gonna do against a foot of reinforced cement? It felt like a waste of our precious rounds. The moment of truth arrived during the push toward a major Japanese command post on Okinawa, a position codenamed Shuri Fortress. The fortress was protected by a primary pillbox designated Pillbox 4, a multi-level structure of poured concrete and embedded coral rock, situated to rake the surrounding area with enfilading fire. It had already repelled 3 straight days of infantry assaults and 2 direct hits from standard 105mm howitzer fire. An M10, part of the 763rd Tank Battalion attachment, was ordered forward. The usual protocol was a slow, deliberate barrage of HE and standard APC, attempting to chip away at the firing port or the roof. This time, the commander, Lieutenant Ellis, took a risk, loading one of the experimental HVAP rounds. Let's look at the raw physics. The standard 3-inch M7 APC shell left the barrel at approximately 2,600 feet per second, $792 ex-dollar. The HVAP shell, however, achieved a muzzle velocity closer to 3,300 feet per second, 1,600 ex-dollar. The kinetic energy, KE, delivered by an object is governed by the formula KE din for $2. While the HVAP shell was lighter, smaller emmed, the squaring of the velocity, VDO, meant a disproportionately massive increase in energy upon impact, all concentrated into the tiny, non-deforming tungsten core. This was less like hitting something with a sledgehammer and more like piercing it with a concentrated lightning bolt. The M10 stopped 200 yards from Pillbox 4. The gunner, Sergeant Miller, sighted the center mass of the concrete face, knowing a standard round would simply crater the surface. He fired. The sound was sharper, more vicious than the usual report. It was the sound of a gun pushed to its very limits. The impact was instantaneous. Instead of the usual plume of white dust followed by a shallow chip, the shell left a relatively small, black, smoking entry hole. And then, a microsecond later, the entire structure reacted. Japanese defender Shuri Fortress, composite of IJA accounts. The sound was not like the other guns, it was a whip crack. Then inside, the bunker became a storm of white-hot steel shrapnel. It was not a breach, it was a detonation of the structure itself. The inner wall, the reinforced steel rods, simply shattered. The air pressure, It felt like our lungs were trying to escape our bodies. The tungsten core had perforated the reinforced concrete, the high-velocity impact generating an intense, localized shockwave inside the bunker. It was a phenomenon known as spalling, where the rear face of the armor, or concrete, explodes violently inward, turning the material itself into lethal secondary fragments. Pillbox 4, designed to withstand external explosion, was instantly neutralized by a concentrated internal force. The M10 crew could not believe their eyes. They had seen a structure they thought impenetrable turn instantly silent. They had not demolished the pillbox. They had surgically destroyed its structural integrity and massacred the occupants with their own defenses. The Japanese response, relayed through intercepted communications and later captured documents, revealed pure bewilderment. They had faced the 75mm and 105mm guns for months. This was different. This was precise, brutal, and utterly unexpected. The Type 95 Hago, which had posed a minor nuisance, became an instant liability. Against the HVAP, the Type 95's thin, riveted armor was less effective than thick canvas. Word immediately filtered back up the chain of command. The HVAP was not just a tank killer. It was the ultimate bunker buster. A machine designed for the European open-field maneuver was now being redefined as the primary fire support element in the Pacific meat grinder. The scarcity of the HVAP rounds, due to the strategic nature of tungsten, meant they were treated as gold, reserved only for the most formidable entrenched targets. The M10's role had completed its first transformation, from a mobile ambush predator to a specialized heavy-hitting siege gun. The next chapter will follow this newfound confidence to the volcanic sands of Iwo Jima, where the M10 will face its greatest test yet, and the true horror of the HVAP's efficiency will be revealed. Iwo Jima, February 1945. A desolate black volcanic island, small enough to be missed on a map, yet large enough to hold the fate of the Pacific Air War. Here, the Japanese defense was not just concrete, it was tough, volcanic ash and rock, honeycombed with 11 miles of tunnels. The American forces had to destroy the enemy meter by meter. This was the proving ground for the M10's radical retasking. The Japanese had not yet fully grasped the scale of the HVAP threat. Their tactical manuals still prioritized avoidance of frontal engagement with the M4 Sherman, but maintained confidence in their ability to flank and overwhelm the open-topped M10s with infantry-borne attacks. Their only tank, the Type 95 Hago, was intended for short, sharp counterattacks to disrupt American advances or protect key positions. The Hago had a 37mm main gun, capable of penetrating the side armor of early Shermans, but utterly useless against the M10's mantlet or even its standard glacis plate. Its own armor was light, only 12mm of steel on the front, capable of stopping rifle fire, but little else. On February 21st, near the base of Mount Suribachi, a determined Japanese counterattack was launched, utilizing 3 Type 95s in a coordinated effort to silence a forward artillery observation post. The attack was quickly spotted by an M10 detachment from the 5th Marine Division. This was the M10's intended role: anti-tank hunting. Captain Masaru Tanaka, Type 95 Commander, IJA. Composite IJA perspective. We were ordered to engage the Americans. We knew the M4s were tough, but the open-top vehicles were vulnerable. Our plan was simple: rapid fire on the crews, immobilize the turret, and close to finish them with shaped charges. We never considered the possibility of a gun faster than the human eye could track. The engagement was over in seconds. The first M10, positioned behind a low ridge, acquired its target, a Type 95 cresting a rise at high speed. The gunner fired a single HVAP round. The result was less a penetration and more an annihilation. The round, traveling at over 3,300 FPS, passed through the 12mm frontal plate as if it were cardboard, through the engine block, and out the rear, resulting in catastrophic internal destruction. The shell did not just defeat the armor, it vaporized the internal space, turning the crew compartment into an inferno of fragmented metal and jet fuel. The Hago's turret was visibly lifted off its race by the internal pressure wave. The second Type 95, witnessing the immediate destruction, attempted a sharp turn to retreat into the jungle foliage. The second M10 fired. The HVAP struck the side of the hull. The velocity was so high that the kinetic energy simply blew the entire side plate outward, the armor itself failing structurally from the sheer force of impact. The Japanese expectation of a tank-on-tank battle was destroyed. The M10, using conventional ammunition, would have killed the Type 95, but perhaps with 2 or 3 rounds, allowing the other tanks time to react or flee. With HVAP, the engagement was instantaneous, total, and demoralizing. This was the power of industrial scale. While the Type 95 was a finely crafted, if dated, piece of machinery, the M10 was backed by the unparalleled American industrial engine. The U.S. production machine could churn out Tatmath B $50,000 ex-dollars and thousands of M10s, and critically, allocate the world's limited supply of tungsten carbide, an expensive, rare resource, to create specialized ordnance designed for an enemy they had only recently begun to understand. This disparity in resources was now manifest in the battlefield reality of a single, devastating shell. The HVAP rounds changed the Japanese tactical and psychological landscape. Their tanks, once a symbol of offensive power, became instantaneous death traps. Their most secure pillboxes were suddenly permeable. The unseen threat was no longer just the American flamethrower or the artillery barrage. It was the sharp, unique sound of the M10's 3-inch gun firing that particular shell. PFC Ben Carter, M10 loader, revisiting his perspective. After Iwo, we knew what we had. The Japs stopped using their tanks. They'd bury them as static guns, try to hide them. But if we found an embrasure or a crack in the concrete, we'd load the special load. We weren't just killing the Japs, we were collapsing their entire universe of defense. It was surgical terror. The M10, once scorned for its open top and light armor, was now the weapon of choice for the most dangerous, most entrenched assaults. Its mobility, combined with the surgical lethality of the HVAP, made it the ultimate tool for cracking the hard shell of the Japanese island defenses. The next chapter will dive deeper into the tactics developed by the M10 crews to maximize the HVAP's potential, transforming the art of siege warfare in the Pacific. By mid-1945, the ad hoc use of the M10 and HVAP rounds had formalized into a unique Pacific doctrine. The tank destroyer force, designed for open plains against tank formations, was now operating like elite heavy demolition teams, often attached directly to Marine and Army infantry battalions facing the most formidable defenses. The key to the new doctrine was precision and observation. Because HVAP rounds were rare and tungsten was a strategic material, they were not wasted. The M10 crew's primary task evolved. First, to locate the precise firing aperture or most vulnerable seam of a Japanese bunker, and second, to deliver the HVAP round through that point. This was less a battle and more a form of lethal armored surgery. Lieutenant Frank Ellis, M10 platoon leader, on tactics. We'd bring the M10 up slow. We'd use the infantry to suppress enemy fire and distract their attention. Our spotter would watch for the precise moment the gunner in the pillbox rotated his gun or the opening was exposed. It wasn't a wide arc of fire. It was a narrow, high-pressure dart. If the round missed the aperture, it might still collapse the concrete, but if it went in, the job was done. It saved hundreds of infantry lives. The M10's 3-inch M7 gun, originally an adaptation of the M1918 anti-aircraft gun, proved to be an incredibly stable and accurate platform. The gunner's ability to aim precisely was paramount. The M70 telescope, with its clear sight picture and ranging scales, was the essential tool. A successful HVAP shot demanded the gunner compensate for the enormous velocity and the resultant low trajectory of the shell, often requiring precise manual adjustments based on range estimation. Precision stat. A typical Japanese pillbox aperture might be less than $18 ext wide. At $300 ext, the M10 gunner was expected to place the HVAP round within a few inches of his aim point. This was marksmanship on a scale never demanded of a tank crew before. The engineers who developed the HVAP understood the immense material cost. The core had to be fabricated from sintered tungsten carbide, a process involving massive heat and pressure to bond the extremely hard material. Dr. Eleanor Vance, metallurgist, Aberdeen Proving Ground, fictional composite based on U.S. wartime engineering accounts, Every tungsten core we sent to the Pacific was a decision. Tungsten was needed for machine tooling, for hardening armor, and for specialized engine parts. To expend it on a shell that might be used against a simple concrete emplacement seemed extravagant, even wasteful. But the reports from the field proved otherwise. The velocity made the difference, not the mass. We were sacrificing a critical industrial element to save human lives. The shift in the M10's role brought an even more intense psychological strain. Operating against fixed defenses meant the M10s were often stationary targets, exposed to every form of Japanese counterattack: mortars, satchel charges, snipers, and the desperate close-quarters charge. The open turret, a feature designed for better situational awareness in anti-tank combat, became a major vulnerability. Sergeant Henry Mac Mackenzie, M10 commander, based on historical accounts. You knew when you were the target. The Japanese focused everything they had on the tank destroyer. You'd have a sniper trying to pick off the loader while they were rolling up satchel charges under the tracks. You had to have nerves of steel because you were the key. If you failed, the infantry advance stopped and guys died. The gunner and I, we were the two most important men on that island for that 1 hour, and we had the world's most advanced gunpowder in our hands. The terror was mutual. The Japanese, facing the constant threat of instant annihilation of their most secure positions, began to employ more unconventional and terrifying tactics, knowing that if the M10 found them, their defense was meaningless. They began burying more Type 95s as static, hidden guns, attempting to use the jungle's density to ambush the M10s before they could unleash the steel wind. The story of the M10, therefore, is not just a technological one. It is a testament to the crew's bravery and adaptation, taking a mobile European machine and transforming it into a precise close-quarters siege weapon in the most brutal theater of the war. This arc of transformation will culminate in the ultimate test, the defense of Okinawa and the final push. The final major confrontation of the Pacific War was the Battle of Okinawa, fought over the island's high ground, the Shuri Line. This defense was the culmination of Japanese fortification doctrine, miles of interconnected caves, bunkers, and anti-tank ditches designed for a war of indefinite attrition. The terrain was steep, muddy, and treacherous. Here, the M10 tank destroyers, specifically the 763rd and 603rd TD battalions, were indispensable. They were not merely supporting the infantry, they were spearheading the attack. The climax came in the assault on Tombstone Ridge, a key elevation where multiple pillboxes commanded the approach. The Japanese were ready with heavy mortar fire, well-placed anti-tank guns, and the last of their buried Type 95s, positioned as fixed-fire obstacles. The M10s, moving slowly through the mud, became priority targets. Yet the crews were now veterans of the steel wind doctrine. They had learned to communicate with the infantry using hand signals, identifying targets, coordinating fire, and protecting their exposed turrets. In one documented action on April 20th, 2 M10s were pinned down by a concealed 47mm anti-tank gun firing from a reverse slope, and a nearby Type 95 tank buried up to its turret was spitting machine gun fire. The M10 crews, under heavy incoming fire, executed their perfect Pacific drill. The first M10 engaged the anti-tank gun. The spotter identified the muzzle flash. The gunner made a rapid calculation, and a single HVAP round silenced the position. The round, passing through the thin steel gun shield, achieved the same devastating internal effect seen in the pillboxes. The second M10 then pivoted to face the buried Type 95. This was the final ironic confrontation, the tank destroyer, designed to kill heavy tanks, using its most advanced expensive ammunition to kill a piece of static light armor. The HVAP struck the Type 95's turret ring, completely shearing the turret from the hull and detonating the internal ammunition. The last of the Japanese armored defense in that sector was obliterated instantly. The M10 tank destroyer, a machine conceived to fight the Panzer Grenadiers across the fields of France, found its true devastating purpose over 10,000 miles away against the coral and concrete of the Imperial Japanese Empire. It was not the quantity of Japanese tanks that mattered, but the density of their defenses. The HVAP round, The tungsten core projectile intended for the German Tigers became the ultimate tool for overcoming the Japanese doctrine of defense in depth. What the Japanese never expected was that the American arsenal, designed for a high-intensity, armored war in Europe, contained a technological surprise that could be repurposed for the slow, brutal siege warfare of the Pacific. They were prepared for conventional anti-tank fire. They were not prepared for the physics of kinetic energy, delivered at over 1 kilometer per second. The M10 became the defining symbol of the technological and industrial adaptability of the Allied forces. It was the siege weapon that broke the back of the Shuri line and saved countless lives. The M10 was retired soon after the war, supplanted by the M36 and the emerging concept of the main battle tank. Yet its brief, devastating career in the Pacific cemented its legacy. A tank destroyer that transformed into a bunker buster, a machine of tactical compromise that achieved total strategic victory, leaving behind it only the sound of the steel wind and the dust of pulverized defenses. The story of the M10 is a reminder that in war, a machine's true value is often found not in its design specifications, but in the hands of the soldiers who adapt it to the crucible of battle. If the history of technological surprise, strategic adaptation, and the sheer grit of the M10 crews fascinates you, make sure to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel for more untold stories from the battlefields of World War II.